It was a quiet Sunday evening in a suburban neighborhood where life usually felt safe and predictable, until that night shattered the illusion. The streetlights cast long, pale shadows across the empty road, the air heavy with the smell of rain-soaked asphalt. At 9:47 p.m., a frantic call came through to the local police department. A woman's voice, trembling and gasping for breath, reported hearing screams in the house next door, high-pitched, terrified, and suddenly cut short. When officers arrived minutes later, they found the front door slightly ajar, swinging back and forth in the cold wind. Inside, the living room looked peaceful at first glance, until they saw the dark stains on the carpet leading toward the hallway. The silence inside the house was suffocating. The television still flickered in the corner, a romantic comedy frozen on pause, as if mocking the horror that had unfolded moments before. The officers followed the trail of blood to the kitchen, where the metallic scent grew stronger. A body lay motionless on the tile floor. Young, female, her blonde hair matted with blood, her hand outstretched as if trying to reach for help that never came. The kitchen light buzzed faintly above her, casting a cold glow over the crime scene. There were signs of a struggle. Broken glass, a chair overturned, a phone smashed against the counter. The knife, the likely murder weapon, rested on the floor beside her, its handle smeared with crimson fingerprints. The victim was later identified as Emily Carter, 24 years old, a graphic designer known for her bright smile and quiet nature. Friends described her as gentle, ambitious, and deeply in love with life. But love, ironically, was also what cost her everything that night. Detectives began their work methodically, photographing every corner of the room, bagging evidence, and marking each splatter and print. They found Emily's phone shattered beyond use, but her laptop on the dining table was still open. On the screen, an unfinished message blinked in an open chat window, a message addressed to her ex-boyfriend, Daniel Lewis. "I'm happy you've moved on," it read, "but I hope she treats you better than she treats herself." It was a kind of message that carried peace on the surface, but hinted at something deeper, perhaps regret, perhaps warning. Investigators immediately sensed that jealousy, heartbreak, and obsession were woven into this crime's fabric. Outside, rain began to pour heavily, washing away faint footprints in the garden that led toward a side gate. A neighbor mentioned seeing a dark figure earlier that evening, a woman in a hoodie, standing near Emily's car, watching the house for nearly an hour before disappearing into shadows. That single detail would soon become the thread that unraveled the entire case. When detectives checked the security cameras from nearby homes, they found blurred footage showing a figure walking briskly toward Emily's driveway around 9:15 p.m. Her face was partially covered, but the outline was distinctly feminine. Slender frame, long dark hair, and a posture filled with intent. Whoever she was, she knew Emily. This wasn't random. This was personal. By midnight, the forensics team confirmed that the attacker had entered through the back door, which showed no signs of forced entry, implying that Emily likely knew her killer and had let her in willingly. The timeline began forming. Emily had returned home from a late dinner with a friend around 8:45 p.m., sometime between 9:10 and 9:30. The intruder entered. The fatal wound, a deep stab to the chest, was delivered with precision and rage. There were defensive cuts on Emily's hands, suggesting she had fought back desperately. But the force of the attack was overwhelming. The killer wanted her dead, not just hurt. As investigators pieced together the early evidence, Daniel Lewis's name surfaced again. He had dated Emily for nearly 3 years before breaking up with her 6 months prior. Soon after, he started seeing another woman, Sophie Turner, a 23-year-old fitness instructor known for her confident personality and fiery temper. Friends describe her as intense, emotional, and territorial. At first, Sophie appeared supportive of Daniel's past relationship with Emily, but behind closed doors, her jealousy simmered. She had seen old photos of them on social media, messages, and memories that Daniel had forgotten to delete. That jealousy would soon ignite into something darker, an obsession that would spiral into murder. By the time dawn broke, detectives already had a suspect in mind. They had Sophie's address, her car model, and a potential motive that fit the scene like a puzzle piece. But what they didn't yet know was how far Sophie had gone to plan that night, or how deeply her envy had consumed her. What began as a love triangle had turned into a deadly storm of emotions, one that left a young woman dead, a man broken, and a jealous heart irreversibly stained by her own rage. The next morning, the police station buzzed with tension. The murder of Emily Carter had already reached the media. Young woman found dead in suburban home flashed across local news headlines, accompanied by images of flashing police lights and yellow tape fluttering in the wind. Inside the precinct, Detective Laura Bennett, a seasoned investigator known for her calm under pressure, stared at the crime scene photographs spread across the table. The brutality of the attack spoke volumes, not just about anger, but about obsession. "This wasn't random," she said quietly, tracing her finger along the photos. "This was emotional. This was personal." Her instincts told her that whoever killed Emily had spent days, maybe weeks, building up to this moment. The first lead came when forensics analyzed the fingerprints on the knife handle. Among the smudge prints was one partial, clean impression, belonging to Sophie Turner. It didn't take long before a warrant was issued for questioning. When officers arrived at Sophie's apartment that afternoon, she was in her kitchen making coffee, wearing an oversized sweatshirt and acting as though nothing in the world had gone wrong. But as soon as she saw the badges, her expression faltered for a split second, just enough for the detectives to notice. "Sophie Turner," Officer Reeves announced, "we need you to come with us to answer some questions regarding Emily Carter." Sophie froze, her coffee mug trembling in her hand. "Emily," she repeated softly, eyes wide with feigned confusion. "What happened to Emmy?" At the station, Sophie's interrogation began. The room was small and sterile, the hum of the overhead light filling the silence between questions. Detective Bennett sat across from her, a recorder blinking red between them. "When was the last time you saw Emily Carter?" Bennett asked. Sophie exhaled slowly, clasping her hands together. "I've never met her," she replied. Her tone was calm, but her eyes betrayed her. The detective watched closely. The micro-expressions, the twitch of the jaw, the way Sophie avoided eye contact every time Emily's name was mentioned. It was the behavior of someone holding back a storm. "Funny," Bennett said after a pause, sliding a photograph across the table. It was security still, grainy, but clear enough to make out Sophie's dark hair and frame walking toward Emily's house. Sophie stared at it, her lips parting slightly as her mind raced for an explanation. "That's not me," she insisted weakly. "It could be anyone." Bennett leaned back in her chair. "Maybe, but that anyone was there minutes before Emily Carter died." The silence that followed was thick and heavy. Sophie's breathing grew faster. She shifted in her seat, crossing and uncrossing her legs, her confidence starting to unravel. Meanwhile, investigators searched Sophie's apartment. What they found only deepened the case against her. In a box under her bed, they discovered printed photos of Emily, some old, taken from social media, others recent, clearly captured without Emily's knowledge. There were handwritten notes, scribbled with phrases like, "She doesn't deserve him," and "He'll see who truly loves him." On her phone, detectives uncovered messages between Sophie and Daniel. Just days before the murder, Sophie had written, "I saw her post again. Why is she still trying to get your attention?" It's pathetic. Daniel's replies were patient but distant. "Sophie, please let it go. Emily and I are over. You have nothing to worry about." But to Sophie, those words weren't comforting. They were infuriating. To her, Emily's existence was a shadow that refused to disappear. As the interrogation continued, Sophie began to crumble under pressure. Her tone shifted from defensive to desperate. "You don't understand," she muttered. She was still in his life, always in his life. Bennett watched her closely. "So, you decided to remove her from it?" Sophie's eyes filled with tears. "No, I just wanted to talk to her," she cried. "I just wanted her to leave us alone." But the evidence contradicted her story. The timeline, the prints, the surveillance, all pointed to one truth. She had gone to Emily's house that night, and Emily never came out alive. Detectives soon visited Daniel Lewis to piece together the emotional backdrop. He was visibly shaken, his hands trembling as he recounted his relationships. "Emily was kind," he said softly, his voice breaking. "We didn't end badly. We just grew apart. Then I met Sophie, and things moved fast. Maybe too fast. He admitted that Sophie often compared herself to Emily, asking questions like, was she prettier than me? Or, did you love her more? Daniel had tried to reassure her, but her insecurity only grew. She'd once driven past Emily's house late at night, claiming she just wanted to see where she lived. At the time, Daniel had brushed it off as jealousy. Now, he realized it was something far more dangerous. Back at the precinct, Sophie sat in the interrogation room long after Detective Bennett left. She stared at her reflection in the one-way mirror. Mascara streaked down her cheeks, her hair disheveled. The confident woman who once flaunted her perfect life on social media was gone, replaced by someone consumed by envy and regret. As the hours passed, she whispered softly to herself, I didn't mean to. But intent no longer mattered. A young woman was dead, a man's life shattered, and Sophie's future was now defined by a single moment of uncontrollable rage. When Bennett returned, she placed one final piece of evidence on the table, a strand of blonde hair found on Sophie's sweatshirt. You said you never met Emily, the detective said quietly. Sophie looked up, her eyes glassy. Then how do you explain this? For a long moment, Sophie didn't speak. Then, slowly, her tears turned into sobs, her body shaking uncontrollably. Between gasps, she whispered the words that confirmed what everyone already knew. It was me, she said. But I didn't plan to kill her. I just wanted her to stop haunting us. The recorder blinked red as her confession filled the room. Another tragic testament to how jealousy can twist love into something monstrous. The moment Sophie Turner confessed, the air inside the interrogation room changed. It was as if the weight of her guilt had finally materialized, pressing against every wall. Detective Laura Bennett didn't gloat or celebrate. She simply sat there, pen motionless, watching a young woman crumble before her eyes. Tell me what happened that night, Sophie, she said gently. From the beginning. Sophie hesitated, her hands trembling, her face streaked with tears. The fluorescent light overhead flickered, casting cold shadows on her face as she took a deep breath. It wasn't supposed to happen like that, she whispered. I just wanted to scare her. I wanted her to know what it felt like, to lose everything. Her voice cracked as she began to recount the events of that night in painful detail. Around 8:30 p.m., she had parked her car 3 blocks away from Emily's home, turning off the headlights and sitting in silence. She had been scrolling through Emily's Instagram earlier that evening. Pictures of Emily smiling at a new cafe, a recent vacation photo, and worst of all, an old post where Daniel had commented a heart emoji months before. That tiny red symbol was enough to reignite Sophie's jealousy like fuel on fire. It felt like she was still winning, Sophie said softly. Even after everything, she still had a piece of him, so she decided to confront her, face to face, once and for all. She described walking through the neighborhood with her hoodie pulled up, clutching a small kitchen knife inside her jacket pocket. Not because she intended to use it, she claimed, but because she didn't trust Emily. When she reached Emily's house, the lights were still on. Through the window, she could see Emily moving around, laughing on a video call with a friend. Sophie watched for nearly 20 minutes, her heart racing, anger bubbling in her chest with every passing second. Finally, when the light in the hallway dimmed and Emily went to the kitchen, Sophie knocked. She looked surprised to see me, Sophie said. But she wasn't scared, at least not yet. Detective Bennett leaned forward. Did she let you in willingly? Sophie nodded. Yes. She asked who I was, and I told her my name. She froze for a moment, then smiled, kind of nervous. She said, "Oh, Daniel's new girlfriend." I could tell she was trying to be polite, but it made me furious. The way she said it, it was like she pitted me. Sophie's voice shook as she continued. I told her I want to clear the air. She offered me coffee. Can you believe that? Coffee. She let out a dry laugh, half sorrow, half disbelief. I sat at her table, and we talked for a few minutes. It was calm at first. I told her I wanted to make sure there were no hard feelings between us. She said she understood, but then she said something that I can't get out of my head. What did she say? Bennett asked quietly. Sophie swallowed hard. She said Daniel was a good man, but that he deserved someone more stable. For a moment, Sophie fell silent, her lips trembling. That word, stable, it broke something inside me. She was calling me crazy. She didn't have to say it outright. I heard it in her tone. From that moment on, everything spiraled. Sophie stood up, yelling that Emily had ruined her relationship, that Daniel still loved her, that she could never move on because Emily's shadow was always there. Emily tried to calm her down, saying, "You need help, Sophie," but those words only made things worse. In a flash of rage, Sophie grabbed the knife from her jacket pocket and pointed it toward Emily. She backed away, Sophie said through tears, but I just kept shouting. I didn't even remember what I was saying. I wanted her to feel what I felt every time I saw her name. The fatal moment came in chaos. Emily reached for her phone, perhaps to call for help, and in that split second, Sophie lunged. The knife plunged forward. I didn't even realize I had done it until I saw the blood, she whispered. Emily collapsed, gasping for air, eyes wide with disbelief and pain. Sophie dropped the knife, her hands trembling. "She said my name once," Sophie murmured, tears falling freely now. She said, "Sophie, please." And then she stopped moving. The room went silent. Even Detective Bennett paused, the gravity of the confession heavy in the air. After the attack, Sophie panicked. She wiped the knife with a towel, ran water over her hands, and bolted out the back door. In her panic, she left the towel, her fingerprints, and the broken phone she had stepped on while fleeing. She drove home in silence, staring blankly at the rain hitting her windshield. "I thought if I just acted normal, it would go away," she said. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face. Sophie's voice trailed off as she buried her face in her hands. Detective Bennett let her cry for several minutes before standing. "You understand that this was murder, Sophie," she said softly but firmly. "You planned to confront her. You brought a weapon. You knew she was alone." Sophie didn't respond. She just nodded faintly, her tears soaking the collar of her sweatshirt. "I know," she whispered. "I ruined everything. I ruined all of our lives." By the end of the session, her statement had been recorded, her rights read, and the case, at least from a legal standpoint, was clear. But as Bennett walked out of the room, she couldn't shake the feeling that jealousy had once again proven itself to be one of the darkest emotions a human could harbor. It didn't just destroy Emily. It had consumed Sophie entirely, turning love into a weapon and insecurity into death. The trial of Sophie Turner began 6 months after her arrest, and by the time it reached court, the case had already become a national obsession. True crime enthusiasts, journalists, and social media users had turned the story into a viral storm. Hashtags like hashtag Emily Carter case and hashtag jealousy killer trended across platforms for weeks. News anchors called it a modern tragedy born in the digital age, while commentators debated whether Sophie was a cold-blooded killer or a deeply insecure young woman pushed past her breaking point. The courtroom, packed to capacity, buzzed with tension on the first day of proceedings. Cameras flashed as Sophie entered, escorted by officers. She looked smaller than ever, her once confident presence replaced by a hollow, distant stare. Dressed in a pale gray sweater and minimal makeup, she avoided the crowd's gaze, clutching a tissue in her hand like a lifeline. Inside, the trial began with the prosecution, laying out its case. The state painted Sophie as a woman consumed by jealousy, whose obsession with her boyfriend's ex turned fatal. They showed the jury photos of the crime scene, the bloodstains, the shattered phone, the knife, and played recordings of Sophie's own confession. Each word she had spoken in that interrogation room now echoed across the silent courtroom. "I didn't mean to. I just wanted her to stop haunting us." The prosecutor, Michael Reeves, turned to the jury and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, this wasn't an accident. This was rage, pure, calculated rage." She brought the knife. She watched the house. She waited for the right moment. And when she got it, she killed an innocent woman who had moved on with her life. The defense, however, presented a different story. Sophie's attorney, Carla Donovan, argued that her client was not a monster, but a victim of emotional instability and untreated psychological distress. She was young, vulnerable, and spiraling. Donovan told the jury, this was not premeditated murder. This was a tragic, impulsive act, a result of jealousy and obsession that could have been prevented with help. The defense called in psychologists who testified that Sophie showed signs of borderline personality disorder and delusional jealousy syndrome, conditions that distort reality and intensify fear of abandonment. They described her as someone living in constant emotional pain, terrified of losing love and desperate to control at any cost. Sitting quietly in the front row was Daniel Lewis, the man at the center of the tragedy. His face was pale, eyes sunken, hands clasped together. He hadn't spoken publicly since the night of Sophie's arrest, but his presence alone told a story of torment and guilt. When he was finally called to the stand, his voice trembled as he recounted his relationships with both women. "I never thought it would come to this," he said softly. "Emily was kind, forgiving, and strong. Sophie was passionate, but she had these moments where she'd spiral. I thought I could help her. I thought love would be enough." He paused, his voice breaking. But it wasn't, and now Emily's gone. The courtroom fell silent. The prosecution used Daniel's testimony to reinforce their argument. Sophie's jealousy had grown uncontrollable, her fixation obsessive. They played text messages from the weeks before the murder. Sophie repeatedly asking if Daniel still thought about Emily, accusing him of lying when he said no, scrolling through Emily's old photos late into the night. This is obsession, Reeves told the jury. This is motive. But the defense countered with a plea for understanding. They brought in Sophie's mother, Margaret Turner, who spoke through tears. "My daughter wasn't evil," she said. "She was lost. She kept saying she felt invisible, like everyone compared her to Emily. She needed help, but she wouldn't ask for it." The jury watched as Sophie cried quietly at the defense table, her shoulders trembling. For a moment, even the harshest critics online began to question whether this was truly a case of hate or a tragic collapse of mental health and emotion. During the third week of the trial, the prosecution unveiled one final piece of evidence: the surveillance footage of Sophie standing outside Emily's house minutes before the murder. The grainy clip played on a large screen, showing Sophie pacing, hesitating, and then walking up to the door. The jury watched in silence as the footage froze on her face just before she knocked. The prosecutor turned toward them. "This was her moment of choice," he said solemnly. "She could have turned around. She could have walked away. But she didn't." As the closing statements approached, the case had divided public opinion. Some saw Sophie as a jealous murderer, others as a tragic warning about the dangers of untreated mental illness and the toxic culture comparison fueled by social media. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered daily, some holding signs that read "Justice for Emily," others pleading mercy for Sophie. It was more than just a murder trial now. It had become a reflection of society's obsession with love, envy, and validation in the digital age. On the final day, when Sophie was given a chance to speak, she stood shakily before the court. Her voice was fragile but clear. "I wish I could take it back," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I thought I was fighting for love, but I destroyed everything I loved instead. Emily didn't deserve what I did to her. Daniel didn't deserve to lose us both. I'll never forgive myself." Her words hung in the air, raw and haunting. The courtroom was silent as the judge dismissed the session for deliberation. Outside, storm clouds rolled over the city, as if nature itself mirrored the darkness that jealousy had left behind. The courtroom was shrouded in silence when the jury returned from deliberation. For 2 full days, 12 strangers had wrestled with the weight of Sophie Turner's fate, murderer or victim of her own emotions. The clock above the judge's bench ticked steadily, each second echoing to the tense air like a heartbeat. Sophie sat motionless beside her attorney, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her face was pale, lips trembling ever so slightly, eyes distant, as though she'd already accepted that whatever came next, she deserved it. Behind her, Daniel Lewis sat with his head bowed, unable to look at the woman who had once told him she'd love him forever. Across the aisle, Emily Carter's parents held each other's hands, their grief carved deep into their faces. When the foreman of the jury stood, the entire room seemed to stop breathing. On the charge of first-degree murder, the foreman read aloud, "We find defendant Sophie Turner, guilty. The single word shattered the silence like glass. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Emily's mother buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably, while Daniel closed his eyes, tears falling quietly down his cheeks. Sophie didn't move. She stared straight ahead, her eyes glistening but her body frozen. It was as though she'd been expecting this all along, as if she'd rehearsed this moment in her mind 1,000 times. Judge Eleanor Graves, known for her firm but compassionate rulings, cleared her throat before speaking. "Miss Turner," she began, her voice steady, "you took the life of another human being, a young woman with dreams, with a family, with a future, and you did so out of envy and rage. There is no justification, no excuse, and no way to undo what has been done." The judge's words hung heavy in the air. Reporters scribbled furiously, capturing every detail for the next day's headlines. Sophie's attorney placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, whispering something no one could hear. Judge Graves continued, "This court sentences you to 25 years to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the first 25. The gavel struck once, echoing through the room like a final heartbeat. Sophie flinched slightly at the sound, then bowed her head. As the deputies moved to escort her away, she turned once, just once, toward Emily's parents. "I'm sorry," she whispered through tears. "I wish I could change it." But their faces remained cold, empty, for them. There could never be enough years, enough punishment, to fill the void her actions had created. Outside the courthouse, crowds erupted with emotion. Some cheered, shouting justice for Emily, while others wept, murmuring that it was a tragedy for everyone involved. The case had gripped the nation, and the verdict only fueled the storm. News stations aired footage of Sophie being led away in handcuffs, her face hidden behind her hair. Commentators debated endlessly on television. Was justice truly served? Could mental illness ever justify murder? Did society's obsession with love, comparison, and validation play a role in pushing Sophie over the edge? In the days that followed, the media replayed every detail of the trial. True crime channels dissected Sophie's interviews. Psychologists analyzed her emotional patterns. Online sleuths argued over screenshots of her old social media posts. A new kind of narrative began to form, not just about jealousy, but about how modern relationships, built under constant digital scrutiny, can amplify insecurity into madness. Memes, think pieces, and podcasts flooded the internet. Everyone had an opinion, but few could look past the tragedy itself. Two young women, once connected through love, now forever linked by death. Daniel Lewis disappeared from the public eye shortly after the verdict. He deleted his social media accounts, left his job, and reportedly moved to another city. Friends said he was a shell of himself, haunted by guilt and nightmares. In one interview months later, he finally spoke. "People say it wasn't my fault," he said quietly. "But I can't help thinking if I had ended things differently, if I had seen the signs, maybe Emily would still be alive. Maybe Sophie wouldn't have lost her mind." His voice broke as he added, "I loved them both in different ways, and I lost them both." Inside prison, Sophie Turner became a ghost of the woman she once was. Guards describe her as quiet, withdrawn, and almost painfully polite. She avoided confrontation, spent most of her time reading or painting in the prison art room. One correctional officer recalled her saying softly one evening, "It's strange. I thought getting what I wanted would make me feel complete, but it only made me empty." She rarely spoke of Daniel or Emily, though she once told a prison counselor, "Every time I close my eyes, I see her kitchen. The light, the blood, the look on her face. I'll never escape that." Meanwhile, Emily's family established the Emily Carter Foundation, a nonprofit that provided counseling and support for victims of stalking, obsessive relationships, and emotional abuse. Her parents said they wanted to turn pain into purpose. At the foundation's first public event, her mother spoke through tears. "Our daughter's story isn't just about death," she said. "It's about how jealousy can destroy not just lives, but love itself. If sharing her story saves even one person, then she hasn't died in vain." By the one-year anniversary of the murder, a small documentary crew released a film titled Shattered Affection, The Emily Carter Story. It featured interviews with detectives, journalists, and experts, exploring how a simple emotion, jealousy, spiraled into an irreversible act of violence. The final scene showed a photo of Emily smiling at a park, sunlight hitting her face, with her mother's voice narrating softly. Jealousy doesn't just live in the heart. It eats it from the inside until there's nothing left but regret.